This is an NBC Charlotte special report.
It was a beautiful day, but there was tension in the air.
We didn't know what to expect.
The place, Dallas, Texas.
When it was closer to the visit, we got more nervous.
Over the course of the next 3 days, President Kennedy and his assassin would be dead.
Made me awful jaded.
And the local TV reporters of the day would find themselves in the uncharted territory of live breaking news.
We did the best we could under the circumstances.
This is their story.
I was running on adrenaline. That's the biggest story of my life.
What they saw.
Very shocked.
How they reported it.
The president's been hit.
And the effect it had on their lives.
People today are sad in Dallas.
We hope that, years from now, the journalism classes will pull it up and say, it's the way they used to do it.
50 years ago, our country was in mourning. President John Kennedy had just been assassinated, and his young family had lost a husband and doting father. As we remember those tragic days in Dallas, we are learning what it was like for the reporters who were there, two of which have retired here to the Carolinas. They were there in Dallas 50 years ago, and they sat down with us at their homes to watch footage they filmed. In the next 30 minutes, you're going to hear their story, the reporter's story. The film you are going to see here was shot in part by this man, former Dallas local TV photographer George Phenix. It was November 22nd, 1963. His first stop was Love Field.
I was not far from the Kennedys as they were coming down that ramp, and it was breathtaking. She was most beautiful, poised. He wasn't bad himself. We were right on top of them at the rope line, and when they got in the car, we were mere feet from the car. But it was a more innocent time.
The day's news coverage was heavily planned.
We didn't know what to expect, but we expected something. Hence the staggered coverage all around the city.
News crews would swap out and then hopscotch events so they could get their film of the president on the air without a lapse in coverage. From the Arrival, George was headed to the Trade Mart for the president's speech.
I was supposed to film him as he arrived and as they left.
At noon, the Kennedy motorcade slowly made its way through the streets of Dallas.
In an open car, as you see.
What was feared to be a hostile crowd was anything but.
A couple of 100,000 people, they estimated, in downtown Dallas. You can see they squeezed the streets.
KRLD broadcaster Bill Mercer was on the air doing the noon news when suddenly it happened.
Our newsroom was across behind the building. Walked in and it was mayhem. People were crying and everybody was yelling and phone calls were ringing. And
who was calling?
I had an open line to Boston, to a state radio station in Boston, waiting for the news of what happened to Kennedy.
Inside, at what was supposed to be the president's next stop, the Trade Mart, the news was beginning to break.
It is true that our president, President Congress, the motorcade have been shot.
And I hadn't been there long before I heard all these sirens. Hundreds, it seemed like, of sirens coming down Stemmons Freeway. On the outside, a woman had a little transistor radio, and she started screaming, "He's been hit, he's been hit." And I said, "Who's been hit?" "The president." And I thought rock, bottle, never thought gun.
Reaction of people were just devastated.
What was your reaction? You're finding
I
out
was
just...
working. When you're working on this, I had no time to get a reaction. I just thought, oh God, he's been shot.
Back at the Trade Mart, Phenix hitched a ride, gear and all, right to Parkland Hospital.
We were going the same way. That the motorcade was taking the president.
Over the course of the next few hours, photojournalist George Phenix would film what are now iconic images of a national tragedy.
I took film of the presidential, and that may be mine, right there. I felt terrible. I felt like I was invading their grief, but at the same time, I knew I had to do it.
As the confusion at Parkland got worse, the Secret Service pushed back.
So I broke from the crowd and ran to one of the wings of the hospital. And the whole time I was running, I thought, I hope they don't shoot me. And luckily the door was open. I ran up a flight of stairs into a room and said, I'm press, I need that window. And to my amazement, they moved and let me film.
I just solemnly swear.
The day was emotional and news was churning fast. Back in Dallas, a police officer was killed and a suspect was caught. At Dallas Police Headquarters, reporters would get their first look at Lee Harvey Oswald.
I was in the third floor as they paraded him back and forth, and I couldn't believe that a little weasel had done what he'd done. He wasn't a big guy, and at the time we didn't know that he was ex-Marine and all that stuff. To this day, I cannot imagine him being a Marine.
So they brought him in, and we're just like this, you know, with Lee Harvey Oswald on that third floor, which is about that wide.
Real narrow.
Oh, I thought,
Is that why everybody looks so crammed in there?
that's why everybody is crammed in there.
The struggle to cover it involved big, bulky studio cameras and film cameras with a separate guy to record the sound. It was all matched up later in the tedious editing process.
We had to put that camera, a huge studio camera, up in the third floor, hoisted it up through the window. We had our mobile unit, big old dumpy truck, had been a truck for the bakery, one of the bakeries in town, and we used it only to broadcast television games from the Cotton Bowl.
It was terrible, and it got worse by the hour as more and more of the national and international press flew in. I mean, it was a soccer scrum. You're getting, nobody punched you, but you're getting elbows.
Then late Friday night, after parading Lee Harvey Oswald back and forth, there was an impromptu press conference. And for the first time, reporters, including Bill Mercer, got to speak with Oswald, and at times, at him.
I really don't know what the situation is about.
I'm right at the side and behind him a little bit, close down. My camera was angled like this, and I was standing here and he was right there.
Protested at that time that I was not allowed legal representation.
We had 150, 200 people in this room, and they were all yelling and screaming. It only lasted about a minute and 10 seconds. They didn't know how to run a thing like this. They never had press conferences, the police.
Even parading a murder suspect that
They never brought up suspects in like this. And nobody could control the media and say, you have a question, you have a question, you know, like they do today. But nobody has these press conferences for expected killers or alleged killers. I was at the detective area, and I don't remember who told me, but I was saying, hey, Bill. He said, we're writing up the charges to charge Lee Harvey Oswald with the murder of the president. I said, really? He said, yeah, you can go ahead and use it if you want to.
And use it, he did.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
You have been.
Nobody said what?
Sir?
You have been.
Nobody said what?
That long, emotionally exhausting day was only about to get worse. Coming up, the first murder broadcast on live TV, and George Phenix filmed it.
I was weak-kneed. I was just stunned.
When the reporter's story continues. The events of Friday, November 22nd, 1963 shocked the world. But 2 days later, the country and the reporters who witnessed Lee Harvey Oswald's murder would be stunned by what they saw. And for George Phenix, what he filmed.
I had been there for hours. Somebody called me from the station at 4 in the morning, said, come down here, we need to get you geared up because you're going to film the transfer of Oswald to county.
That event was taking place in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters, and it would be broadcast live on all 3 networks.
Well, it was tight because there were a lot of us. So we set up, waited, smoked, talked, made small talk. And the police had asked us all to say, all right, we're not going to rush the guy when he comes out. We're going to stand back. Well, that lasted about that long.
When it was time, cameraman George Phenix took up his position. He was rolling film, and with the viewfinder on the left side of his rig, he never noticed the guy on his right, Jack Ruby, a Dallas strip club owner, wearing the hat, the man who was about to dramatically change history.
The camera had those big Mickey Mouse ears that hold the film canisters in it, and so I never saw him. I didn't know he was there. Never saw him come down the ramp. Don't know how he got there.
It was fairly commonplace for him to show up at scenes.
It was.
He was next to you?
To my immediate right. Stepped out and shot him. And that was, I believe, the first murder ever broadcast on television.
The suspect's name is Jack Rubenstein, I believe. He goes by the name of Jack Ruby.
One surprise after another, and this was probably the bigger surprise. I mean, we were terrified that the president was shot. Now we got the guy who shot him that we're going to take and have him charged and find out about it. He's shot.
Questions have since lingered about Oswald's murder as it became the seed of conspiracy theories that still exist today. But as local news people, they knew Jack Ruby. They saw him around. He was just the little strip club owner who was known to carry a gun. Was it a cover-up? They don't think so.
But here's a key factor. I told you about the dog, right? His dog was in the car. He brought the dog with him in the car and left his dog in front of the Western Union Station in the car. Now, if he was going to shoot somebody, why would he bring the dog with him? If he was going to get in trouble, the dog was going to be in trouble, right? So we figured that he just at the moment saw his opportunity and stepped in. They didn't think about the fact his dog was back at the car.
Later that day, back at the station, the gravity of what George Phenix had just filmed was slowly sinking in.
They had the Secret Service and the FBI there, and we all saw it at the same time as it came out of the soup. And once I saw it to the end and knew that I had an image, I walked out of the room because I was weak-kneed. I was just stunned.
The newsmen went different directions after the assassination and Ruby's trial in Dallas. But in 2003, they later connected with 2 other colleagues to co-author their book called When the News Went Live. It wasn't just a story. It was their story, and they needed to tell it their way.
Made me awful jaded. You know, a man, Ruby, shot another man right in front of me. Our president was murdered. It was a circus, a zoo, and you didn't know who was lying, who was telling the truth. And reporters are skeptical anyway.
All of us were pretty darn good newsmen, but this is something we'd never faced before. This is something that everybody's just said, go, do it, get it. We didn't have floor men, we didn't have directors, we didn't have all that. We just did it.
We wrote the book, 1, because we wanted to, 2, for history, and 3, for journalism. We hope that, you know, years from now, the journalism classes will pull it up and say, it's the way they used to do it. Sorry.
Coming up, the first steps of their last day together and impressions of a young reporter seeing the President and Mrs. Kennedy for the very first time.
They were bigger than life. I mean, they earned Camelot.
When the Kennedys arrived at Love Field in Dallas that morning, reporter George Phenix was there, taking in their grace in what would become their legacy on their last day together. Kennedys were a breath of fresh air, young, good-looking, both full of grace and charm and charisma. They were symbolic of all the change happening in America, and they believed in their new frontier.
But the day started out so beautiful, nice, crisp November. The Kennedys got off the plane, and they were bigger than life. I mean, they earned Camelot.
The visit to Dallas in 1963 was the first time TV news photographer George Phenix would see the President and Mrs. Kennedy. Him 46 and tanned, her just 34, both radiant and fashionable. At least to the young George Phenix they were.
So I'd never seen a president before, and I was just astonished at how they moved down that rope line greeting people. And she was just the classiest woman I'd ever seen. I mean, she moved with, a dignity.
These first impressions are now lasting impressions of moments first captured through his lens, now treasured in his memory.
They should have lived.
Coming up, lasting impressions of November 1963 and the need to tell their story their way. The job of reporting news sometimes puts you on the front lines of life, seeing both the very good and the very bad. In November 1963, George Phenix and Bill Mercer saw, filmed, and reported the national grief. The images they filmed made them question their own sense of humanity at times, questions they have pondered for 50 years.
Oh, I remember this like it was yesterday, 40, 50 years ago.
Here in Dallas, this is the scene where President Kennedy was assassinated on Friday. It's filled with tragedy because the president was killed here, because an officer was killed here. This is a red, white, and blue ribbon. It says, with deepest sympathy, God forgive us all.
And this is the early part of the flowers. It became packed with flowers.
This is you narrating?
And I'm narrating the various cards and people sending in. It was a pretty tough assignment.
And people today are sad in Dallas as they place their mementos.
Was it awkward amongst all those people to do this?
No, nobody was saying anything. And I guess they could tell what I was doing. Notice that great microphone and all the cable.
Right.
We didn't have any other kind.
One says, in memory of our president. A small American flag draped across a replica of the Holy Bible. This one says, forgive us. There are no smiles here. This one says, in memory of our president, whom we love dearly. These are just a few of these floral tributes to the president near the spot where he died. And as you walk through this, you feel the hallowedness of the ground now.
It's tough being a reporter. I mean, it's tougher than you realize. When Bill was down at the Triple Underpass doing his stand-up bit, I mean, he was intruding on people's grief. When I was filming the flowers in the floorboard of the limousine, I was intruding on somebody's grief. I don't know. And you have to just bite it off and go do it.
A cross with one red rose. A lone carnation that says, may you rest in peace.
The hard part was just reading the things without breaking up, but you keep taking big breaths.
That's part of what makes reporters jaded, I think. That is what makes people angry at us, because we step into their world at a time when they're feeling very vulnerable. But we do it partly because it's our job and partly out of a sense of history. These films we've been looking at will last forever, I hope. I mean, that doesn't justify it, but it makes it easier to go down.
50 years later, and it is still very tough to talk about, but we think it's important to hear history from the people who were actually there. It is the reason they wrote their book called When the News Went Live, and it's the reason they sat down to talk with us. I'm Bill McGinty. Thanks for watching.